Okay, so welcome everyone to my another podcast. So today I'm super excited because I have one of my guests is Taryn McGregor, who is the director on in one of the biggest model agencies in Calgary, and we've been planning this for quite a bit, but finally she found some time for me. And I have a lot of questions because one of the most common question I've been receiving from my fellow photographers is, we would like to start working with model agency. We want to get access to, people who are interested in photography. They willing to stand at the front of the camera and don't be kind of scared like most of our clients. So my first question to you is like what the requirements are whenever someone approaches you. Like, are you guys doing any screening? Do the photographer has to showcase some kind of portfolio? Like, what's the process is to kind of getting some work or getting even models at the front of the camera based on the model agency side?
First of all, I'm really happy to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. And in regards to your first question, it does depend on the agency, so I'm not going to speak for all agencies because every agency is different. However, like specifically with us, the first step is honestly a reach out. So reaching out to us, normally email communication is best. And then in general, we do screen everybody that we potentially would either promote to our models or bring on a roster. So we would go through an interview process. Right now we're doing them digitally due to COVID, but in some instances in the future, hopefully, we will be able to actually see people in person again. Depending on how the interview goes, we will request a portfolio. Again, Numa is different than other agencies, so I can't speak for others, but the other thing we do is depending on kind of where a photographer is in their journey, we also support photographers in building their portfolio. So even if they're newer, then they can communicate with me and I can help them work with newer models to build up their portfolio, to learn the qualifications that are needed to work with an agency. So what quality of images, lighting standards, all those types of things. I work with multiple photographers all over the country and help them build up those skill sets so that at some point they can start actually getting paid by agencies or getting paid by clients. Because modeling and photography are fairly analogous in that you have to develop first. You can't just walk out and be like, I deserve to get paid. You have to actually develop some skills. So we kind of help coach you on those skills. Both photographers, makeup artists, models, we do kind of do it with everybody in the industry because that's basically what we do in the industry is we need good images, and those images come from both models and photographers. So.
For sure. So I just want to follow up with what I just asked you, but there's also questions about having proper website, and we talk a little bit about portfolio. But one of the actually questions I've received from one of my viewers is like, is there any requirement when it comes to the social media? Because I know in different cities in United States, for example, like New York, I know we're talking about really big cities, and those are like places where there's completely different level of photography and model agencies and stuff. But for example, the agencies require certain amount of followers on social media. If this is something which also you guys look into it, or this is something which is just kind of secondary, more important is the portfolio and the skills itself.
Yeah, I think it would depend on the level. Again, because we're a development network and we support photographers of all skill sets, whether you're newer in the industry or skilled, then I think the question is, I think it depends on the agency, because in the States, you're correct. Like if I'm going to hire a photographer to work with my models and I'm going to be paying that photographer, then yes, my requirements will be higher. So I do require a specific level of photography skill. I require specific abilities, because if I'm going to refer a photographer to a model and that model is going to pay that photographer, or I'm going to pay that photographer, I do expect a certain level of skill. Because in a lot of instances, especially with agencies, we will guarantee the images. Okay. So if I'm going to guarantee that if they shoot with you, they're going to get good images, I need to be able to back up that guarantee and know what to expect. And again, certain agencies, especially in the States, they will use the photographers as a form of advertising. So that's why they'll have limitations or minimal expectations on, say, Instagram followers or website or anything like that, because that photographer is going to be promoted by the agent. And if they have a bigger following, it's easier to get a model booked in with them. So credibility and professional exposure online, whether it be a website, Instagram, TikTok, all those types of things, is becoming more and more important to help weed out the people that are a little bit shady, or the people that lack experience, or the people that lack skill set, because generally good photographers have a very good following. They almost always have a website because that's how they get a lot of their clients. And nowadays TikTok is becoming more important than it used to be. It's a newer field, but I am noticing that agents, models, photographers, everybody's kind of jumping onto TikTok as well. So it's not just Instagram anymore, it's also TikTok.
Yes, well, it's growing like crazy. That's for sure.
Yeah.
So my next question to you is, and I think this is something which a lot of photographers they really struggle with, that, and is the process of retouching. And I know from the model agency perspective, probably they don't want as much retouching, right? But then they say, well, I'm a creative person, or I'm a creative photographer. So how much retouching is too much in your opinion? And based on your experience, like what do you require, or what kind of images from the shoots you're looking for, and based on the retouching? Because I know the digital era right now, like, it's just crazy, right? And retouching is a huge part of photography. And sometimes I think some photographers, they spend way more time on retouching than on photography itself, right? But then when the image is pushed too far, you're just destroying everything, right? And sometimes those models, they don't even look the way they're supposed to look, right? So I just want to kind of discuss this a little bit with you, because I know you guys looking at retouching from kind of completely different perspective.
Exactly. Yeah. And our idea of looking, so again, it will vary by agency. So I'm not going to speak for all agencies, because different agencies will have different qualifications or expectations on their images. And a lot of times that depends on the type of clients the agency works with. We work with all different types of clients. So our expectations are going to be probably different than some others. And also it's important for for photographers to understand that the level of retouching should vary by the type of photo shoot. So an editorial retouch is going to be different than a lifestyle retouch. And that's because the types of clients you're trying to appeal to will be very, very different. Because in the end, on our end, what we're trying to do, any agency, is they're trying to have a portfolio of every model that represents that model in a way that will book clients, that will attract the clients to that agent. So our perspective, or what we're looking for, is, does the image make the model attractive to a specific type of client based on the type of model they happen to be. So whether they're lifestyle model, commercial model, child model, promo, fashion, runway, all those types of things. So in terms of level of retouching, again, this will vary, but what I always like to say is it's important to keep the essence of the model themselves. And I do find that there are, especially newer photographers, because they're not familiar with all of the features of, say, Photoshop, or they actually only use Lightroom as an example. They don't necessarily have the capacity to retouch to the quality that an agency would request. And what that quality is it's not about manipulating or changing a model to look really good in the image according to the eye of the photographer. It's about making that model look like their best self. So I do see some photographers that, because of the photo shoot is an editorial shoot, they'll elongate the chin, they'll thin and they'll warp the image. They'll do a lot of things to make the image look fantastic, but then the image looks nothing like the model. And that's not ideal, because I don't want to be advertising a model with specs that are inaccurate to what that model actually looks like, because then the client might hire that model, and then the model walks in and they're like, you look nothing like your photos. And that's a problem. But at the same point, I also don't want the image to be under-edited so that it turns a client off on features of a model that aren't necessarily permanent. And what I mean by that is blemishes.
Mhm.
Or as you guys all know, when you shoot high res, if you're shooting in a very high definition image, you see a lot more in the image than you would in person. So an example would be indentations in the skin. So if I'm a little bit puckered on my lips, I tend to have little lines in the skin, and that is very, very visible via the camera, because if it grabs all the
Absolutely.
shadows and the highlights, right? So it would be eliminating those things out of an image that would take away from looking at the essence of the model, and brightening those things that make the model look their best selves, but not manipulating the image in such a way that the model no longer looks like themselves. So that's my recommendation for retouching. And doing it, you want to make sure that in retouching, it still looks real. And that I find is also a limitation for a lot of newer photographers, is because they're not trained in, say, dodging and burning or frequency separation or anything like that. They tend to blend. So they do bandage and blends. And unfortunately, when you blend, you lose skin texture.
Yes.
And I want to be able to, if I'm looking at a good photographer's image, I want to be able to zoom in and see pores. I don't want to be able to zoom in and see a porcelain face.
Yes.
Because of pores suggest that the image is more real. So if you're removing blemishes, you remove blemishes with a specific strategic tool. You don't just blend the image out, or just, grab a piece of skin and then, pop it on and then don't do any blending around. Because I see that happen as well. And I'm like, I can see literally where you're editing.
Yes.
I shouldn't be able to see in the image that it's been edited.
Absolutely.
That's ideally what the long-term goal is if I look at an image, it's a beautiful photograph of a model. The model looks bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, they're looking really fantastic, and they have perfect skin, but it still looks like them. Does that make sense?
Yes. So I'm going to push this a little bit more, because we're living in the era where we can do pretty much anything in Photoshop, right? And it's just, from one hand, it's a scary thing, but from the other hand, it's kind of cool to have those kind of abilities, where we're working on some, I would say, small imperfections. But I experienced for even my career that people were approaching and they were asking me to just completely change the shape of the face, change shape of the lips. I even had a story which was really sad, I would say. I had a client who requested to enlarge certain parts of the body, which was just terrifying. I'm not a surgeon, and I don't know if even should do stuff like that, right? But what's your perspective on those type of, I would say, not requirements, but when the, let's say, model is asking the photographer, can you make me skinnier, or can you make, I don't know, change my lips, or all this stuff? Is this something what you guys allowed to do, or this is completely forbidden, and then it's there's no even discussion about stuff like that?
So from modeling, from an agency perspective, it's not something I would ask to do. And the reason is, again, it's not true to the model. So then if the model books work with a client based on the images that were presented to me, and then the client views that model, the model shows up and they look, 3 sizes larger than their portfolio depicts, that makes the agency look bad. So from an agency perspective, I would not want a photographer to manipulate an image so that they no longer look like the model. Now, there are exceptions, and that's just because of the concept of 2D worlds. So what I mean by that is, and I've had some of my images edited where, I'm putting my arm forward and I happen to give myself fat arm because I push it against my body. So then my arm looks a lot larger than it is in real life because it's closer to the camera and I've decided to flatten it with my body. If that happens, yes, I would say you can do a slight warp or something to give the image a true likeness to the model. But if it's making the model skinnier than they look in real life, then no, absolutely not. Okay. Because of, again, you're falsely advertising what the model looks like. I can understand from a client perspective, personal clients that hire photographers, why clients will want to do that. Truthfully, in this industry, and I've been working in it for a while, you are dealing with a very vulnerable population. So people in general are coming into modeling, not in general, but in a lot of instances, modeling provides a sense of validation or appreciation for the way the model looks. And 99.9% of us have insecurities about our bodies. In some way, whether we don't like our lips, we don't like our nose, we don't like our hair, we don't like this, we don't like that. So it's natural for a person, any person who has any form of insecurity, to ask for that insecurity to be removed.
Mm-hmm.
because of then they'll feel prettier or they'll feel better about themselves. What we try to do through our network is we try to help people appreciate the things that they might not like about themselves, and learn to love them, because truthfully, beauty does come from loving yourself from within and expressing that outwards. We all have things that we would want to change about ourselves, but I've experienced this quite often, where what you might hate about yourself or what you think is really unattractive is something that a photographer or a client actually is looking for. It's what their favorite part about you is. So it's important to also help encourage models and people to learn to love themselves, to not have to create that manipulation in order to feel beautiful, because they are.
Yes.
Everybody's beautiful in their own way. And that's something that every individual person has to go through, that,
Absolutely.
challenge of learning to love themselves.
Well, I think the biggest issue, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. I was just going to say, and not wanting to, elongate their chin, get rid of, little bulge in the arm, make their boobs bigger, like all those types of things. Like
Yeah. I think that, like a lot of those, like, clients and models, they know what we can do, right? And I think just the fact they know about it, and then they can just maybe not force it, but they can ask, hey, can you do this? Because it's doable, right? If we as a photographers have some kind of ethics and some kind of morals, that's another story. But so how this whole thing works from the client perspective. So let's say the client comes in hiring your model, they're doing some crazy manipulation to those images, and they just like make them completely unreal. How you guys approach this? This is like, if they pay, they're allowed to do whatever that they want, or you guys also have some kind of limits or some kind of rules, which...
So the agreements are made with clients beforehand, in terms of the usage of the imagery, and that kind of stuff, and they pay based on those specifications. So they have to normally specify the type of shoot it's going to be, what the images are going to be used for, where they're going to be posted, all of those types of things, because that controls that falls into the usage category. When a client is paying, technically they have the rights to do whatever they want to the images. And we can't tell them, hey, no, you made that model look different than they were. Like, we can't tell them that, because if in the end they paid for that model, they can do what post-production they choose to do. So we don't have the, we don't have the ability to tell a client, no, you made that model look too skinny. Because if that was their decision. They chose that decision. We do have a policy against fur with our agency. We are a fur-free agency, so clients can't use fur with us. And again, we also have rules in terms of etiquette on set. We do have limitations in terms of anything that becomes too suggestive or anything like that, because if we also don't agree with taking advantage of people in forms of their body. But again, it always depends on the comfort level of the model and the comfort level and the rules associated with the client, like what type of contract they have. But yeah, if the client in the end wants to change a model, change their hair color, that kind of thing, it's not something we can say, hey, no, client, you can't do that, because they legally paid for those images.
So let's switch the gears a little bit, and I want to talk a little bit about working with models. So I want to start with some kind of documentation, such as model releases and then all this stuff. Like, do photographers should somehow be prepared, having some kind of contract signed with the model? Do the agencies also have some kind of contracts which can help have some kind of agreement with photographer? How this whole thing works? Like, I basically, the way we work together, we have some kind of agreement, and then this whole thing is just put in place. But if someone who is starting off and then doesn't have any experience, how they should approach this whole thing?
So again, it will depend on the agency, because every agency has different protocols. Some agencies will actually require photographers to sign exclusive contracts with the rules and limitations that photographer would have to abide by while they're on with that agent. So it really does depend on the agency in terms of the relationship with the agency and the photographer. But yeah, most agencies, they have a contract or a terms and conditions with their models. So their models are expected to adhere to a specific level of professional etiquette all that fun stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And again, those contracts will vary by agency, but they normally follow the general rule of professionalism, etiquette, all those types of things, which then the agent would hold the model liable for. I do recommend, again, it depends on the photographer. I personally recommend photographers should cover their butts and have release forms for when they're shooting with models, just because, again, it's better to dot your I's and cross your T's than not do it and then run into a problem in the future where you post something and the model's like, I didn't give you a right to post that. So release forms I do find in general are good per photographer, because I, as an agent, I don't just send out release forms on behalf of the photographer, because every photographer has different usage rates.
Absolutely.
So we don't send them on behalf. Like we don't have a generic release form, but in our terms and conditions, we give the model gives us the right to use any images that are taken of them. So there is a rule in there. And we have rules against defamation and all that fun stuff, but the photographer should also have their own. I personally
model release. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's kind of leads me to the next question, and this is something which I deeply believe is extremely important question, and also I just really want to discuss this because I think every photographer should know about it, and I'd like to kind of hear your side of this kind of question is working with underage models, because sometimes we might get someone at the front of the camera. We don't know how old the person is. And let's say she's 14, she looks like 20. And then we might run into some issues and problems and all this stuff. And I just want to kind of briefly talk about some of the models I work with your agency, which, the model was under the age, and she came with her mom. I welcome both of them, and then she was basically attending the entire photo shoot. She was watching everything, what is happening, and it was kind of cool because it also makes me more comfortable, because I have a parent who is witnessing this whole thing, and I also noticed that the model itself, she felt way more comfortable, right? So if you could just kind of briefly talk about this whole thing, because I just want to warn photographers, and I want to talk about it because sometimes some of them, and I've heard some horrifying stories about this stuff, so I just want to kind of get a little bit deeper into that topic.
Yeah, and so when it comes to underage models, I personally recommend, and we recommend this to every model, if they are underage, they should have a guardian on set with them. Now, it is determined by the model themselves, because you said some models are much more comfortable having their parents there. Other models are the opposite. So I've had some models where they feel, especially, it sounds bad, but like models that have momagers or dadagers, so they feel overwhelmed by having the parent stare the whole time. So in those instances, the parent can be close by. They can sit outside. They can hang out at a coffee shop right next door, be right, available to support or provide guidance or support to the model. But we tell every model that's underage, you should have a guardian with you. Okay. Now, to clarify, guardian. Because a lot of underage models, they like to bring their friends. And that I don't think is appropriate, because that can still get the photographer in trouble. I've actually seen it. And they're not a guardian. They don't see the world the same way. They're the same age, if not maybe a couple years older. You're still dealing with a maturity aspect. So don't bring your boyfriend. Don't bring, your best friend who happens to be 18 when you're 17. It should be a parent or a guardian. And that is also for the safety. That's for safety of both. That's for safety of the model, to make sure they're comfortable, to make sure they feel good. It's also nice because then they can lug clothing around, which can be very beneficial for a model. And then the opposite is true for the photographer, because if you're shooting and say something were to happen or you received bad feedback, you've got somebody there that was also a witness. And it helps protect photographers from any compromising situations. It also prevents them from doing anything potentially compromising. So that's why we say it's protection for the model as well, because I've had a lot of underage models that shot with people and they ended up in compromising situations. So having a guardian there as that level of protection to the model, especially when they're shooting TFP or they're shooting with somebody that nobody else is familiar with, doesn't have, a website or an Instagram with a whole bunch of followers. They don't have the credibility built up yet. Helps protect the model and the photographer from any backlash that could potentially hurt either or of them.
Okay, so let's kind of go a little bit even deeper into this topic, and let's talk about um, the rules when it comes to just working with the models. Like, do you guys like you guys preparing the models, like what the photographer is allowed to do? So I just want to kind of share a little bit of story, which I think maybe showcase a little bit what I'm trying to kind of say. So, um, I was running a workshop, and I had a little bit older gentleman who just come in for this workshop. So we had this presentation photo shoot, and then what happened was everyone was basically allowed to work with that model, right? And the person like didn't I know for a fact he didn't have any kind of like bad intention, but he was trying to kind of depose model and show her exactly. So but he started like touching her, like it wasn't inappropriate, but like I think I could sense that the model is not feeling comfortable, right? So I just kind of paused this whole thing. I'm like, okay, you know what? You can't do that. Well, first of all, you have to ask if she's okay with this. If not, like you have to come up kind of different way to deal with this. So let's talk a little bit about it, because I know some of those models they're not going to say anything, right? Like they think that, well, photographer is older, or he's got some kind of like authority here, he's running the show, he's taking photos of me, so he can do whatever he wants, right? But that's not true, and we know there's certain boundaries. And I know also we're living in the world right now where this whole thing got even more crazier, I would say, and we have to be even more careful, and we have to find ways to communicate with models certain ways, so we're not gonna kind of cross the lines, right, throughout the photo shoot. So if let's talk a little bit about it, and let's
Yeah, so yeah, I would say, truthfully, I would, as a photographer, always ask permission before you ever touch a model. Um, and I always ask permission, like the photographers I work with, I ask permission on where I'm going to touch to. Be like, okay, I'm just going to grab your hair and I'm just going to push it back. Are you okay with that? And then if they're not okay with that, be like, okay, can you do it? Or just ask them to do it. The other thing that can be really beneficial, especially, and I don't mean to say this, but working with male photographers, because of the instances um, of reports tend to come more from male photographer from models talking about male photographers than female photographers, is having an assistant on set that is female. So that the assistant can go in and can make those adjustments. You say, this is my assistant, she's going to be helping with any more wardrobe issues or anything like that, because then you get permission in advance, and then the assistant can come in and they can just do a hair flick, they can tighten clothing, they can readjust a jacket if the inside is showing or anything like that, and then it's not seen as inappropriate. Like I've been on set many times and I've assisted because I'm female. The models are comfortable with me, and I will also be like, I'm just going to come in and I'm going to fix that for you, and then they're like, okay. But it's also the model's responsibility to understand that they have the right to say no. And that's a common misconception in this industry, because there's the fear that if I say no and I say I'm uncomfortable, then I'm never going to book a job and nobody's going to ever want me. But the truth is, there are boundaries. You have to understand where your boundaries lie and be firm with those boundaries. Because there are photographers that can get touchy feely, and that is inappropriate. You don't touch a model without approval, and truthfully, never touch a model in an area that would be deemed inappropriate. If that makes sense.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, touching their shoulder and pushing it back is one thing, but going to the lower end or certain areas, not appropriate. Again, it is context based, so there are certain instances where a stylist might have to get in there and do things, but again, that's pre-approved. The model is aware of it, and the model has to state they're comfortable with it. Because as a model, like I do get poked and prodded. I've been a model myself, and I've had them do weird adjustments on my outfits. I've had to accept that. Your body is part of the production. So sometimes you have to be okay with being touched. But again, somebody touching to readjust my bra strap because of it's not working and they're a stylist is different than somebody coming in and fondling, if that makes sense. So there's limits and there's lines, and everybody should always be very careful never to cross those lines, and always ask permission. That's the easiest way to kind of get about not running into a problem in the future, is getting that permission first.
Yeah. Well, I 100% agree, and I know every photographer who's starting off, they should learn those rules, right? And they because I know for some of them they might do something which I think sometimes, like they don't even think what the consequences might be and how this whole thing might be taken by the model. But that was one of those experiences I had during that workshop that, sometimes you have to be extremely careful. Okay, so let's move on and push this a little bit more, and let's talk about when photographers pushing too far, and I know some of them, I have, again, some experiences during the work I do that the photographers, they want to showcase, certain things, and they want to just kind of make the, let's say, model looks more sexy and stuff. But again, sometimes this is not appropriate, right? So yeah. So
working with an agency, we pre-approve the images. We pre-approve the concept first.
Okay.
So if I'm working with a photographer, I will get an idea of the concept, a mood board, an idea of what the concept is, because if we need pre-approval for comfort level, because certain models are comfortable with different things. I have models that are comfortable with nudity. They love it, actually. And then I have models that are absolutely not. I have models that wear hijabs and won't show their wrists. So the comfort level is varied by the model. And the part of our job is to combine or to connect photographers and models that have the same level of comfort or style that they're going for. Going too far is basically, like with us, going too far would be if you gave me a mood board and then you were on set with that model and then you went out of scope with that mood board and went to something that was what I would call inappropriate. That is out of scope. And that is unacceptable. And a photographer shouldn't do it. You should be very clear about what you're shooting. You should clarify what that shoot will be with your agent and with your model, so that they're aware of what the expectations are on set. And then and I tell this to my models, then if the photographer goes out of scope for that shoot, then the model has the right to say no. Say that's inappropriate. That's not part of our agreement. We didn't agree to do that type of photo. I'm not comfortable doing that type of photo. And then it helps protect the model. Also, like in regards to bookings, just as an example, a photo shoot for clothing is not the same rate as a photo shoot for underwear.
Yes.
So if a client is giving me a mood board for clothing, and then the model's on set and they agreed upon a rate and we're all good with the rate and we've clarified that, and then the model's on set and the client's like, okay, now we want to do some underwear shots. That's a no. You don't do underwear shots because of that was out of scope, and underwear is not the same rate. It's also different if the face is recognizable or not recognizable. So rates will vary. So it's important to always be aware. I think the best thing for any photographer or model is to be aware of what the scope of the shoot is. Mood boards, styles, level of clothing / lack of clothing, style of images. That's the purpose of a mood board, is to get an idea of the concept of the image, what they will be shooting, what type of posing they're expecting from the model. It just helps make everything easier and clarify. So personally, from my perspective, I recommend every photographer create a mood board for every shoot they do. And in that mood board include, if you don't have a makeup artist, include the type of makeup you want the model to do and the hair you want the model to do. Give them ideas on the types of poses you're going to be asking for. So when they walk in, they're not surprised. Let them know what type of wardrobe will be used. All those things will help clarify the shoot and help move it a lot more smoothly, so that when you run into situations like what you're talking about, where people are doing things that are out of scope or inappropriate, they're going too far, that can be nipped in the bud immediately.
So my next question is, so what's their advantages of working with the model agencies? Because I know there's photographers who, chase whoever, they can find, versus, working with the model agency. And I can actually speak for that because, we've been working for a little bit, and I have amazing experience working with your model agency, and all the models are always on time. They prepared for every shoot. There's no issues that there's no show, for example, which I've experienced many times, where I had someone and they cancel me 5 minutes before the shoot, where there's a whole team prepared. So those are kind of my experiences. So what else we can add to this?
Yeah, so working with an agency, there can be a couple of advantages. And this is, again, they're not, I can't guarantee all of these advantages because, again, it depends on the agency you're working with, and it also depends on the models you're working with. But I've noticed a really dramatic difference between freelance models and agency models, mainly in the level of professionalism. When you're working with an agency, the model has an accountability factor. So they've signed an agreement with us, which means they're not allowed to no-show to bookings. They no-show to bookings, are off the roster. So to them, there's something to lose if they do something inappropriate or unprofessional, regardless of whether it's a TFP or if it's a paid shoot. So there's that level of security for photographers, because we pre-vet all of our models. So all of our models have met with us. They have signed an agreement which states they are expected to be professional. All of them will have done at least 1 or 2 photo shoots in the past, so they have more experience than, say, a newbie. Plus, in a lot of instances, and we can't guarantee this because no agency can make a model shoot with only their photographers, but in a lot of instances, they've also shot with photographers we know. So we've gotten feedback on how well did they shoot, what was their experience level, how good are they at actually shooting, and that kind of helps also provide a little bit of peace of mind to the photographers, because again, freelance models, a lot of times, and I've heard this from many photographers in the past, they show up and they look nothing like they did on Instagram. You know, wanted them blonde and all of a sudden they've got purple hair because they decided to go purple the day before, and then you're getting something that you didn't ask for, or they show up half an hour late, or they show up drunk, or they show up, you know, with disheveled hair because they expected you to do it. Like there's a lot of issues with freelance models because they've never actually worked with a professional before. So they don't know professional expectations, and they have no accountability. Their only accountability is themselves.
Yes.
And a lot of freelance models, they don't get paid. So to them, like, it's, I do what I want to do. And if I got drunk last night and I'm hungover, well, then I just don't show up.
Yes,
it's no dirt off my back. It didn't cost me any money to do it. So it's not that big a deal. That's very common with freelance. I'm not saying all freelance models do that. There's amazing freelance models out there. But when you are dealing with people that have never invested in themselves, which several freelance models will be of that perspective, that I need to build a portfolio for free, I'm worth money, you need to pay me, those types of things. When you're dealing with people that have never gone through the trials and tribulations of actually building a professional portfolio or dealing with professional clients, they don't have that experience, so they don't even know what to expect. So they just go based on what they've created in their own world, and sometimes that lacks professionalism in that way. Whereas with agency models, again, I can't guarantee it because sometimes we do run into a bad egg, but with agency models, there's an expectation there. They are expected to do well. They are expected to perform. We are providing them a service by even getting them photo shoots. So we do have an expectation of them, and that kind of helps increase the professionalism that you would expect on set.
Absolutely.
If a model does show up and they're late, guess what? I'm going to be calling that model, being like, why did you show up late? Why did you show up with dirty hair? What do you think that does for reputation for anybody? So they basically get, I hate to say it, yelled at, and nobody likes being yelled at, whether it's from your parents or from your agent.
Well, you guys preparing those models, right?
Yeah.
To the
we're
industry.
Preparing them for life. And we're preparing them for professional, work. It's like that in work or in life anyways. A lot of the skills that are associated with showing up professionally on set for modeling are associated with showing up professionally for a job or an interview or anything. So it's preparing them to, live life properly and with professionalism and with etiquette.
Yeah.
So,
and this is also something what I was always admire, right? That the look is a one thing, and I know there's a lot of beautiful girls out there, beautiful male models, but the professionalism, I think, for established photographers is like the thing number one, right? They want to work with people who they're on time, they prepare, they know exactly what they're getting into, and that's what I always valued the most, right? So,
and I also think that like, especially photographers, and I'm assuming everybody that's watching this understands what the concept of a TFP is or a collaboration is. Depending on the level of skill of the photographer. So if you're brand new and you don't know what you're doing, in order to do a TFP, you tend to have to work with newbie models. So models that don't have any experience, don't have any skill sets, all that kind of stuff. As you start working up the tier and as your skill sets as a photographer improve, the quality of models that you can attract for TFP, i.e. unpaid shoots, also improves. So like, for instance, you, Rafael, you're getting more experienced models because your imagery is good enough to attract those models. Because like other like very trained or untrained photographer would have to pay those models in order to work with them, if that makes sense.
Yes.
So,
absolutely.
So that's another thing to also understand from a photographer perspective, is that as you improve in your professionalism, the models you will attract will also improve. And that's what I agree with, is that at some point, you are wanting to hire professionals that also take this industry seriously, because if they're not taking the industry seriously, if they're not taking themselves seriously, then your images aren't going to turn out. And it's not fair to you to spend all that time creating this opportunity for them and shoot with them for free, when you could be, being hired by a potential client for whatever it happens to be, to build a portfolio. If they're not going to take it seriously and they're not going to show up and help you create the images that you're looking to get. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. 100%. So my last question is how the agency can help photographers. Like, do you guys do, let's say, portfolio review? Like someone approaches you and they're like, look, you know what, I'm starting off, or I've done some shoots. Can you guys take a look at my images and let me know where I'm at, and or how you guys can kind of help me with developing, my skills?
So exactly, yeah, we do exactly that. So the first step would be obviously to reach out to the agency and to see if we actually are in your area. We're across Canada and the US, so we do work with photographers all across the country and in the United States. So the first step would be to reach out to us. We would interview you and discuss with you, what your experience level is so far, what your starting point is, and then we kind of go from there. And we offer all different things. So we do offer portfolio development to photographers. We will guide you through how to build a strong portfolio, what is good in an image, what is bad in an image, what we look for, what we don't look for, and I'll go through images with you. We can help arrange TFPs. If you're a newer photographer, we can help you arrange TFPs with models that are also looking to develop their portfolios, so that you can actually start building that. And then we can, again, review the images afterwards, help you make your selects, help you learn how to edit. We are going to be in the future, and we did do this in the past as well, we offer workshops. So certain skilled professional photographers and such will do workshops. We've done lighting, we've done posing, so teaching you how to teach models how to pose, because that's the very important step. Newer photographers don't tend to know how to pose a model, but that as a trained professional photographer should know how to do that, because especially when you're working with newbies, they don't know what they're doing, so you have to give them the guidance. So we do workshops on that. We can help, depending on the level of the photographer, with exposure. We can promote photographers for shoots. There's a whole level. It just depends on kind of where the photographer's at as to what we can provide. But we can do pretty much all of it.
Well, it seems like you guys can do a lot. I didn't even expect half of this, but it seems like if the photographer is really passionate about what they do, you guys can really help them to be on the right path, right? Because a lot of them, I think, they're lost and they don't know which direction they should go. So,
and again, like I think the biggest thing is they're going to want to invest in themselves. I think that's a big thing. So invest in workshops, whether it's through us or whether you're doing a Photoshop workshop online. Invest in good equipment. So cameras, lighting. All that fun stuff, because those are very, very important. We also, like, I have newer photographers that shadow some of my experienced photographers, and they just help them on set, so that they can listen and learn and hear what trained photographers are doing on set. And I do think that's important as well. Like, find a mentor, find a tutor to help you, because photography is an art. It's not going to be that you have to completely copy what they're doing, but you will learn tips and tricks from every other photographer to help you create your own version of yourself that is marketable and advertisable and can make money.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you so much. That was a absolutely pleasure talking to you. I've been waiting for this for a long time. And I'll definitely link information to your agency, and then I'm sure there will be some people who might have more questions. Thank you for all this time. I think I took way more than I supposed to, but I really appreciated your time.
Of course, anytime. And if they want to, they're more than welcome to reach out. and we can help them get their journey either started or progress, and see what they need and see what they can do to become the best photographer they want to be.
Absolutely. Okay. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.